Hey there, Suzi here. Before we get into today's episode, I want to share this special message with you. Now, my co-host Michelle and I love masterminds. Not only do we belong to masterminds, but we also host a mastermind. We started it almost 8 years ago, and it is the premier mastermind for women business owners who want to grow their business with a specific focus on marketing. Now, this group is usually completely booked out, and very occasionally we open the doors and invite a handful of women in. So if you're growing your business, but you're struggling with feeling overwhelmed, or like you constantly have a split focus when it comes to your marketing, this could be exactly what you're looking for. We have an amazing time together, and the women in the group are extraordinary. They're great cheerleaders, supporters, advisors, and colleagues for you. And they're also seeing extraordinary results. We see people cracking the $1 million, $2 million, $3 million mark, launching new e-commerce sites that go from $0 to $10,000 a month in sales. They're doubling their conversion rates, they're growing memberships, they're selling courses, they're growing their personal brands, and they're getting all kinds of media exposure and speaking opportunities and so much more. You can learn more about the mastermind and join the wait list over at herbusinessmastermind.com. We're going to open the doors soon, so you definitely want to be on the list to get an invitation. So head on over to herbusinessmastermind.com. Hi, you're listening to the Content Sells Podcast, a show all about how to create content to attract, convert, and keep your ideal clients. Welcome to episode 225. I'm Suzi Dafnis. I'm a little bit croaky, but I am here with my co-host, Michelle Falzon. Hey, Michelle, how are you?
Hey, Suzi, I am doing really, really well. And I was going to ask how about you, but I think the croaky might tell us that there's, a little bit going on there for you. But I'm so glad you're here and that you're showing up.
Thank you so much. It's it is a big, really busy week this week. And yes, I've got a little bit of a croaky throat left over of just having a cough the last couple of weeks, but it doesn't matter. Here's what I know, that Michelle, you and I are going to be seeing a lot of each other over the next few days. We've got podcasts to record. We're doing a bunch of things with our masterminders this week, and, couldn't dream of spending the week with a better person.
Oh, well, right back at you. Ditto. Even though it's a busy week, I get to more time for having Suzi Dafnis in my week is always a good thing. Mm-hmm. And we've got several strategy sessions that we're going to be sharing together with our masterminders. And for those of you that are long-time listeners, or if you're a new listener, Suzi and I run a marketing success mastermind together, the Her Business Marketing Success Mastermind. And it's a small group of women who are all business owners, and we work with them in a mastermind kind of format, which is a peer-to-peer sort of group where we all support and assist each other to grow our businesses through marketing. And one of the things that Suzi and I offer as the hosts and facilitators of this group is a one-to-one sit down with each of our masterminders twice a year. In fact, it's really like a 1-to-2 because they get both of us.
They get both of us.
It's really an in-depth session where we take that deep dive into any specific area that they might want help with. They could be launching a new product. They might need help reviewing their funnel. Maybe they're deciding whether to take on a big opportunity, or they're dealing with something they might potentially have to pivot on or change, or something that's not working. Maybe there's an upcoming launch that they're getting ready for, or they want that big picture bird's eye view or support or a sounding board for their overall strategic plan, or they might be mapping out a new course. I mean, you name it, Suzi. We have talked about it on a strategy session.
Yeah, and they're always a whole lot of fun. It's a really great way for us to impart really valuable knowledge in a concentrated way to every specific masterminder. And, whatever it is that's right for them at that moment, which is a little different to what we do the rest of the time, which is a lot of offering coaching and support and mentoring and marketing advice on a group basis. But that is not all. We've got our live Q&A call with our masterminders this week as well. As I said, it's a really big week, a great week where we're going to be answering a lot of questions. And as we go to air, it's like the end of a year, and we know that our masterminders have already got their plans in place for the new year. They've mapped out when their peak periods are going to be, what campaigns they've got. And so they're already asking really great strategic questions that we're supporting them with so that they enter the new year really hitting the ground running. So today, however, on the show, we're going to be talking about how we produce this podcast. We have a number of members inside of Her Business, a number of listeners who are either running a podcast or you're thinking about maybe a podcast is right for you and your business. And so we're going to be taking you a little bit behind the scenes of how we produce this show.
Yeah, absolutely. We do get questions from people about various aspects of how we put the show together. So we thought it was high time here on our 225th episode that we did a dedicated show on this topic.
Yeah. So as I said, whether you already have a podcast and you're thinking, oh, I have this podcast, but there's so many spinning wheels, and it's kind of stressing you out, or you are looking to create your show, what does it look like? What could it look like? We've been running this podcast, I don't know, is it 6, 7 years, Michelle? I
Susie,
know,
it's
I
like
should know.
9 years. I did the
Oh,
math.
my goodness. Okay. So for 9 years, we've developed some great processes and ways of thinking about the podcast. And we're going to go into that today. So this show is even for you if you're not planning on doing a podcast, because there's a ton of ideas here that you can map to any content creation project. So this is the Content Sells show. It's about how to create content that sells. So there might be a tool that we mentioned today, or a concept we discuss, or a workflow that you can map across to what you do. So maybe you like to do Facebook Lives, or you're a YouTube content creator, or you have a blog or a newsletter, or any content that you might be putting out on a regular basis. You might get some tips for processes to make that workflow so much easier for you, because the easier we can make it, the more likely we are to be consistent with the production of our content. So keep your ears open to hear how you might take what we're doing and map it to your situation. So, Michelle, we're going to approach today's show by breaking it down into 3 key segments.
Yes, we are. We're going to look at how we produce the Content Sells podcast, as you said earlier, Susie, and we're going to look at it really from this end-to-end perspective, from start to finish. And because of that, we thought the easy way to talk about this was to cover really 3 key stages in that end-to-end process. There's the pre-recording stage, and that is everything we do before we get to this point where Susie and I are actually right now recording this episode. So everything that got us to here. And then the second stage is really the recording stage, and that's the process and the insights around what happens right after we click that start record button, and everything that really goes through to when we hit the stop record button. What is going on? What are we doing? How are we doing it? And then the third stage is post-recording. So that's all the things that happen after we wrap up today's session. How does the show get post-produced and shared with the world? So it's pre-recording, everything that comes up to leading up to getting us ready to record. Then there's the recording itself, and then there's what happens after the recording. So what we won't have time to get into on today's show is how we market the podcast. And that will very likely turn up as a future episode. So watch out for that. There's a lot of juiciness there, but we're really getting you to that point where the podcast is produced and you've actually released it to the world. So that's how we're focusing today, on how we produce the show.
Thank you. So we're going to dive right into and talk now about what we do in that first stage that Michelle mentioned, that pre-recording. That is everything that we do before we get to the point of where we are right now recording this episode. So, and it starts really where many of our projects start, Michelle, and that's in the planning phase.
100%. If anybody's listened to the show, they know we like to plan.
I do. And here's something you need to know. We've released an episode for this show every 2 weeks, barring just a handful of exceptions, for the last 9 years, as Michelle mentioned. So that is a long time to be consistently putting out episodes every 2 weeks. So we need a process that's fast, that's effective, efficient, because we both have busy schedules. We travel a lot. We have a lot of client commitments. Plus, we're committed to a process that gives you, our dear listener, the best show that we can produce for you, right? We put a lot of thought and energy into giving you the best show because we so appreciate being in your ears. And over the years, the consistent feedback we've received is about the quality of these shows, and that's something that we're very proud of. So how to maintain the quality while keeping up the consistency of quantity of shows while we run our own busy businesses and our lives? Well, planning, as Michelle said, has been a big part of that and continues to be. But we don't have an overcomplicated planning process, and I think that's been the key. We've valued progress over perfection and kept the process fairly streamlined over the years. And here's how it works. So we use a tool called Trello. You might be familiar with it, but if you're not, it's a simple tool that you actually can get a free account for, or you can upgrade to a paid account and get some extra bells and whistles. And it works like an old corkboard or a pin board that you might have in your office, or you might have seen, on television if you're more of a digital native. But if you imagine this board that you've pinned a punch pinned a bunch of cards or ideas on, and you've grouped them by category or topic. And you can move the cards around, either changing the order within a specific topic or moving something from one topic to another on the board. That is exactly how Trello works. It's a very visual tool where you can drag and drop things to organize your thoughts. So for us, each topic of the podcast is a fully fledged idea. And so we add a card to Trello that is about that topic. And sometimes the topic is half formed. It's not the final episode name, but it's an idea that this show is going to be about how we produce the show. Then we start adding cards to that topic as we think of things. Like we might think of the 3 stages, or we might think of a story we want to share, or we might think, oh, well, let's include this review. We'll talk more about that. But the idea is that we are kind of brainstorming at the very early planning stages. There's nothing that's locked down. We can move the order of the shows around in Trello as we figure out the dates that we want each episode to go on. And that's something that we do actually strategically schedule what goes out when. But we use Trello because, one, it's a shared tool. Michelle and I can be in it simultaneously or at different times. And it is simply, as I said, a drag and drop tool, which makes it a no-brainer. There's not much to learn in order to be able to use it.
Yeah, I love Trello, and we've been using it right from day one, actually, Susie, and it really has never failed us, I don't think. And what we usually do, just for the listener, as you're imagining this Trello board, it's got all of these episodes on the board, and that's a lot of episodes for 225 episodes. And what we tend to do is really far over on the right-hand side, some of those like lists of cards, the topics, the episode topics, like Susie said, they're more of an idea. It's like, oh, we'll be on a strategy session with a masterminder and we'll think, oh, that's a good idea for a podcast. Or Susie will think of a great idea. She's driving a car and she'll get home and pop something on the Trello board. Or we'll be talking about something and we say, oh, that sounds great. I'll put it on the Trello board as an idea. So the right-hand side, the far right of the Trello board, is content that's not yet really fully fleshed out. It hasn't been assigned a specific publish date. And, maybe think of that like our icebox, where we're keeping ideas kind of cool and at the ready to be used as and when we might want to drag them further to the left, where we've got some specific publication dates or publish dates. And, when we started off, as we're talking about planning, and if you're right at the beginning stage of your podcast journey, like I want to let you know, we're 9 years in, or nearly 9 years in. And so we've really kind of figured some things out. When you're getting started, just start where you are, start as imperfectly as you are. And when we first started, we just planned a few episodes ahead. Like we were just happy to have the next couple of episodes sort of figured out. And I remember, Susie, we did a little grid, I think, where we sort of thought about maybe what the first handful of episodes might be. And then over the last few years, though, we've been planning almost the whole year ahead. And that was a real up-leveling a few years ago. And that really came when we aligned the episode topics that we're going to be talking about with the Her Business Growth Guides publication schedule. And Susie, you do this great thing in the Her Business community with these growth guides. Do you want to just mention what they are?
Sure. So inside of Her Business, there are some very specific areas of business that we know successful businesses have really dialed in. And we cycle through those areas of business, focusing on one area very deeply every single month. And so in that month, we will give our members hundreds, if not thousands of dollars worth of resources, things to listen to, things to watch, things to read, and they focus around this one area. So while we're all busy running our businesses, we're still taking time every month to go deeper into an area of business that might need tweaking, improving, us up-leveling our skills. And so these growth guides feature what we call our Her Business growth zones, which are these proprietary areas that we have our curriculum and that we mentor and coach to. So they're things like, to give you an example, sales and marketing, or systems, or growing your team, or putting in the right technology. And so these schedules are created 1 year in advance. And so then, as Michelle said, we can align the episodes with those same areas of business, so that we are producing content that the community is ready to listen to, but it's also covering essential areas that you, as maybe you're not part of the Her Business community yet, but we've been doing this for long enough to know that we're going to give you something really valuable that's going to contribute to your understanding for an area of business that's essential to your success.
Yeah, it's such a great framework that you have for these growth zones and really organizing all of your content around these growth zones. And you might be sort of hearing, well, Suzi, one of them's sales and marketing, and another one's systems, and another one, is technology, and another one is people, and so on. And how is it that we have a content sales episode for all of those things? Well, if you think about it, there is, a lot of systems related intelligence that you need when you're creating content. There's a lot of team that you need to think about, like who's the right people to have on your content team. When you think about technology, there's all sorts of things we can talk about with content. One of the growth zones that I love, Suzi, and I know it's one of your favorites, is the you growth zone. Like, how are we showing up? And so that's where episodes like, staying in your own lane and finding your confidence and all those things around content come from. So it was kind of a real breakthrough when we went, you know what, we can align all this content that we're creating in the podcast to the growth zones. And even better, what we can do is we can sync up the publication date of our episodes so that they're syncing up with when Suzi's releasing a growth guide around a particular topic. So now what we do, because we're planning the year in advance and we can see the big picture, we make sure the month before a growth guide topic is coming out, we're releasing podcast episodes that are relevant to that topic. So they might go out in month A, because the growth guide's coming out in month B for that topic. We publish in month A. That gives the team time to collect all the links and all of those things, and then publish them in the growth guide in the following month. So that's a real tip for you too, as you're listening, whether you relate this to your podcast or anything else you're doing. How might you sync up various pieces of your content that you're creating so that they all build and support each other? Now, what this means is there's always fresh new content when Suzi publishes a growth guide. So she knows she's got this wealth of resource in her library, so she can dip into things that have been in the library for months or perhaps even years, because there's some evergreen content in there that is brilliant and doesn't need to change from last year to this year to next year. And she can sprinkle through that some new things, some current things that we're covering in the podcasts, and we can just cycle through those throughout the year. So that is one of the real benefits of planning, and that's what we tended to talk about here. And it's the Trello tool just makes it kind of easy, and it's not perfect in there. Like, if anybody went and looked at our Trello board, it's not perfect.
It makes sense to us.
It makes sense to us, and it totally does the job. And we do have a couple of little things that make a difference. So each Trello kind of card, each Trello section, I don't know, what's the right terminology for that, Suzi?
I don't know. I think we'll go with card. That's fine.
Yeah. So each Trello card, we put the episode name on it. Often it's a working title to start. And we also put the published date and the growth zone that it refers to. Now, that we do consistently. At first, we'll just be popping ideas in, but then as we start to move them from the icebox into an actual publication date, we start to think, okay, what would this title be? What is the exact publication date? And the reason for that will start to become clear as we talk you through the rest of the process.
And there's a couple of things that I just wanted to reiterate. One is we plan in advance. Two, we're very strategic about the content that we are going to be sharing on the podcast. And one of the things is that what you don't want to do with your podcast is to have it be one more thing you need to do and find time for. And so the thing about strategic marketing, which is what Michelle and I are very much about, which is what our mastermind is about always keeping your end game and the big picture in mind. And so you're not just spinning your wheels going, I'm creating content for content's sake, but that you have a way, one, to brainstorm your ideas. So we're using Trello as a place to brainstorm and just dump ideas as they come in, but also to organize our thinking and then order it in a way that is serving some of our bigger goals. So whether those goals are to publish content about a particular growth zone in a month, or to line it up with any other major activity, it's all done very thoughtfully. And that does take, as Michelle said, planning way in advance. And I know, because I have another podcast where I don't create having someone to be accountable to and to have a co-host is a really great way to keep you on track. And so knowing that I have to show up for Michelle means that I do some of this stuff where in my own podcast, sometimes I don't plan as much in advance. And so I can see the difference of how I come into this podcast knowing that we're well planned and, we're about to be planned for the next 12 months versus my other show when I'm only ever planned a few weeks in advance. That feels a lot more stressful to me. So I just wanted to land that. So with the recordings, so not only do we plan in advance, but we actually batch our recordings. So we like to plan that time well in advance, keeping in mind the published dates and allowing our team time to produce the actual show without us having to stress and rush to get something out every 2 weeks. So most of the time, this works really well. And for the last few years, we've often been 6 to 8 weeks ahead in terms of the episodes that we've produced. That is, if, say, episode 210 was due out on the 18th of April, we likely had that already produced, ready to go, all the bits and pieces in early March. So it doesn't always work out like that. I want to be very real with you, especially if you've got travel and large projects, which Michelle and I have had a lot of all of those this year. But that is our goal, is to be well in advance. And there are a couple of times this year when we were recording a show that was going out the following week, right? There was no other way to make it work with our schedule. In fact, this episode, we're recording it here and now. It's actually going live tomorrow. So this is a really rare occurrence for us to be producing something so close to the deadline. But like I said, we've had a lot of overseas travel in the last few months. We've had our Reach retreat in Hawaii, and we've had to find a way to make it work with that schedule. But it's not, lastminute.com is a little saying our team likes to say, let's not be lastminute.com. And we're not, because the team is ready. Like, they know the recording is coming today and they have the other pieces in mind. But I guess the main point is that you want to be working well in advance. And now and then there's going to be the exceptions where it's like, I'm recording today, it's going live tomorrow, which is what's happening with this episode.
I think that's such an important point you're making, Suzi, because like you said, we want to be real with you. Life happens. Somebody might get sick in your family. You might have a big trip. There might be just some things that go on, or just a confluence of circumstances that puts you a little behind in your schedule. And that is always going to happen. It won't always be perfect, but it's that old saying, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And so even though this is a little bit right before the deadline, the distinction is, as you said, Suzi, I love that, lastminute.com. It's not lastminute.com. We know that we've known for weeks this was going to be recorded a day before the deadline. And so the team has reserved this afternoon to work on things. Suzi and I have talked in our preparation before this call about, getting all of the ducks in a row right after this session so that we can expedite that. So it's kind of, planned, tight deadline, if you like. Right, so right. It really it's sometimes going to be like that. And the planning piece, and I want to speak to what you said, Suzi, about the co-host. The planning piece actually is even more important, I think, if you co-host, because like Suzi said, we've both got busy schedules, and so getting us aligned sometimes takes forward planning just to book in the batching of the recording dates. And you don't want to be kind of hustling to do that last minute and finding, we've got 2 days before the show's got to be live and neither of us can meet because our schedules are conflicting. So it's even more important if you do choose to co-host your podcast. And there's lots of benefits. Like, I just love getting to co-host this with Suzi. And there's that accountability thing. There's the bouncing off each other. I think, we share ideas and make each other stronger and all of those things. And solo podcasts are awesome too. But just if you do happen to co-host, that planning piece is going to save you a lot of complexity, potentially friction as well with your host, just around just getting things in and making it smooth and planned in your calendar. And on that point of the calendar, one thing that we found works really well, we've shared the Trello tool with you. The other thing we do is it's so simple. Like we said, it's no highfalutin stuff here, but it works. It works, is we just have a shared Google Calendar. And all our content cells related activities go into that Google Calendar. And we have one where all our mastermind related activities go. And so I can make sure I tick the box that says in my calendar view, show me the content cells calendar, show me the mastermind calendar. And I can see those in my main calendar. And so can Suzi. So, and so can the team that is actually doing a lot of the scheduling for us. So a shared calendar is a great thing, even if you are hosting the podcast on your own, because that is a calendar that team can view and that other people that are supporting you in the production of the calendar can view. And what we also do is we mark out our mutual, if we're doing something together, or our separate away dates on the calendar. So we might be running our 2-day in-person mastermind event. We block that out. We can't do anything. Obviously, there can be no podcast recording on those dates. Or if I'm away, or if Suzi's away, or if I've got a live event I'm presenting elsewhere, or Suzi's got a live event she's producing, we block those things out so that it's really clear where the gaps might be in our schedules.
And this year has been, and it's been tight. And here's the thing, like you mentioned people earlier, even if it's just you, like really having the support with this podcast from our team is such an important key to our success. And we have a member on the Her Business team who helps with this scheduling part of the process, laying it out chronologically, making sure that I haven't misread my calendar or that Michelle isn't going to be away, and just helping us know that, oh, you know what, you need to record by this date because the two of you are away, but this episode is released while you're away, et cetera, having someone do that thinking. So Michelle and I will brainstorm the new episode ideas, as we mentioned, and they will live on our Trello board. And if you can imagine it visually, this is the icebox that Michelle mentioned. To the left of the board, if you're looking at it, are the specific episodes that we've locked down, and to the right of it is our brainstorm ideas. And so once we're, aligned our ideas with the episodes that we want to release, we schedule those episodes based on the dates that we're going to publish. And so we drag these episode cards around on the Trello board until we have the order of release that we really want. So super easy to do visually. Then we look at the overarching flow of the show. So we want to take into account, well, how does last episode's topic fit in with this episode? Are we keeping the topics diverse? Does the order actually make sense based on other activities that we have? Like a couple of times a year, we'll open up the mastermind program, or we might be running our reach retreat, or there might be other things that might require just a little tweaking of the order of the content so that it makes sense. Are we keeping aligned with the growth guide timing and the topics that we're featuring each month? Also, has it been a while since we've done an episode? Like we just recently did an episode on Ideal Client, and it had been years since we'd done one, so it was something that we really wanted to revisit. Are we doing an interview? We like to do interviews throughout the year. We've had amazing guests on the show, and those sort of things don't turn around over time. So if we want to do an interview, we'll think about it well in advance and then keep our radar open on who might be a good guest. If there's a theme that we're seeing in our mastermind group, or something that keeps getting raised in our strategy sessions, then we might want to slot something in. So we're also opportunistic. We plan, but then there might be an opportunity. Like early this year, we did an episode on AI, very early this year, because there was just so much talk about it, even though, it's been a year since ChatGPT really rose in popularity, but we didn't have that on our calendar. But we were opportunistic, and then we put that in somewhere where we wanted to make sure that people were getting the right guidance as it comes to using AI for their content. So it's great to see the big picture and the flow of the shows over the course of the year. And so the main point we're trying to make is plan ahead.
Plan. And the other great benefit, if we haven't sold you already on the idea of planning your podcast, it means you don't have to keep doing this in bite-sized pieces. Like when we first started, we just had the first few planned ahead. And I think that's a great way to start, because you don't yet know what you don't know. So just get in and do a few episodes. But as we've got into the cadence, as we've got into the swing of things, we've been able to do a bit more forward planning, which means we don't have to go back to the Trello board together and go over it 10 times this year. We do it once. It means we don't have to go and record one episode at a time. We'll batch episodes together. It means we don't need 7 messages to the team. We just need 1 message to the team. So the complexity really gets pared back when you can plan ahead and do things, in fewer chunks of time. And also what I love, Suzi, is that I feel on track for the year. The podcast doesn't feel like a thing that's like, oh, I'm behind and I'm up late. It's like, no, I love it when we've got a podcast Like when we finish a recording session, I feel so smug just for a little minute. It's like, we are 6 weeks ahead. All right, all right. So I like that feeling of being ahead, of being on top, that I'm on the front foot with the podcast, or that we're on the front foot with the podcast and not the back foot. Plus, you can also anticipate things when you take that bird's eye view. You know, Suzi alluded to this earlier. You can see other milestone things that might be happening in the year, like anniversaries or times of year, and plan accordingly. Like last year, we realized we'd be hitting episode 200. So we thought, oh, that's actually quite a milestone. So we knew well in advance. We realized well in advance, because you can be head down in the weeds doing the doing, and suddenly you're on episode 200 recording it, and then you go, oh, this is episode 200. Maybe we should have done something. So we had a lot of advance notice, because we just spent the time looking at our episodes and went, oh, there's 200. And so we were able to do a live episode. It was so much fun. It was such a great community engagement. I mean, it gave me such a lot of motivation to, you know, keep up leveling the podcast. And I know, Suzi, the same for you. So, and, you know, we must be looking at when is our 10th anniversary, Suzi, because that's something to start looking at as well. But you can look at things like the start of the year. Like we always do our book recommendation episode at the start of the year. And that is going to be coming out very, very soon. You'll hear a bit more about that later. So you can create a bit of a cadence, a bit of a pattern, a bit of a flow when you take that bird's eye view.
And like you said, it just starts to put your mind at ease when you kind of know what's happening, when you have some certainty about what's happening in the podcast. So once we have the schedule, we start to think about recording dates. So once we have a schedule of ideas, we think about recording dates and how we're going to batch. You know, we're going to record 2 episodes or 3 episodes this month, or whatever it is. And we pretty much record every single month, sometimes more than once, just to stay on top of our flow. So we have someone on the Her Business team help us. They have the unenviable task of finding dates in the shared Google Calendar that Michelle mentioned, dates where we're both free, where we can get these big blocks of time, because we are batch recording, so we need a few hours, and that are ahead of the publishing dates for each show, and also take into consideration what else is the team working on. You know, what other activities do we need to consider so that the workflows work and we're not being crunched for time?
It is an unenviable task, and they do it so well. And I am so incredibly grateful for it. It's what you said, Suzi, about, you know, just having somebody to support you with some of the nuts and bolts, or even just the scheduling, or even just 1 or 2 pieces of a podcast can be very, very helpful. Even if you're a one-woman operation or a one-man operation. And we tend to, as we're sort of talking about batching now, we're getting, you know, we're starting to think, okay, these are the episodes we want to record. These are the published dates. How and when will we group these together for recordings? We tend to batch 2 to 3 episodes at a time. So based on our fortnightly schedule, so every 2 weeks an episode comes out. If we've recorded 3 episodes, that's 6 weeks of shows in one recording session. Hence my earlier smug comment. Suzi, I think we've done up to 4 shows in one batch a couple of times. And that was sometimes out of necessity, because, you know, we wanted to get a bit ahead because there was a big campaign coming or something else going on. But that can be a lot. And so I think that 2 to 3 is our sweet spot, because, you know, we put so much into these shows, and with each episode being somewhere between 30 to 60 minutes, and often more towards the 60 than the 30, it's a fair chunk of time, literally just talking time, to do 3 episodes in one sitting, let alone what it sort of takes to get there.
Yeah, right. Because, you know, these shows need to be written. And so that's 1-hour shows that need to be written. So we want to plan for all that. So we're planning it, we're brainstorming, we're planning ahead, we're starting to think about our batch recording. And so while we're getting the batching and the dates figured out, the team starts to create a Google document for every episode. Now, we have an internal system where we do a couple of things. We create a Google document for every episode. We also have a Slack thread for every episode. So if you're not familiar with Slack, it's like an in-house instant messaging system that you can, again, organize by topics and channels. And we have a dedicated Content Sales podcast channel inside our Slack account that Michelle and I and a couple of other team members are a part of. And so we create a channel for each batch. So say we're recording episodes 225, this episode, and 226 today, which is what we're doing. We have a thread that is a combined thread for episodes 225, 226 being recorded on the 18th of December, etc. And so we're putting all our communications in the lead up to the recording today and in the post-production, which we'll talk about later, in that thread. Now, grouping the communications like we do in Slack has been a key to using Slack successfully. Otherwise, there'd be bits and pieces of information all over the place. So we have a Google document for each episode. We have a Slack channel for each group of episodes that we're recording together. But we also use a project management system. We use a program called Teamwork. Other people use Asana. You might have a different system. But inside of Teamwork, every episode has its own task list. That means every task associated with producing an episode, whether it is the scheduling, the Google Doc, the setting up the Slack channel, creating a Zoom link, but also the post-production, some of the things we're not going to talk about today, like graphic design and social media, etc. All the tasks associated with each episode are put into a task list, and then they're assigned to the relevant members on our team. So it gets assigned to a member, it gets assigned to a date. So even if it's just you doing all the steps at the moment, it's great to have a task list. We're very big on planning. We're very big on project management. And you do this so that nothing gets missed, so that it becomes a little bit of a cookie cutter. So this system that I mentioned earlier about the Google Doc, we have a system around that as well. Are you surprised? No. So the Google document.
People are saying, no, we're not surprised.
No, not surprised. So the Google document for every episode is saved inside of a larger Content Cells podcast folder. Each Google Doc has a naming convention. We have a naming convention for each document so that it's super easy to find everything. So, for example, in our naming, we have the episode number, the episode title, even if it's a work in progress title, enough information for us to know what it is as we're going into the show. Then the publication date, all that is in the file name. And as I said, it's clear who on our team is responsible for creating those documents and when they need to be created in order to give us time to put all our notes, all the things we're going to talk about, onto that document well in advance of recording. So there's a process for that. So we have a template. They take the template and create a new episode template, and they'll include things like the introduction, the conclusion part, the part where we will, add a new podcast review that we're featuring. So that's a shout out to a listener who's left us a gorgeous message about what they've enjoyed and which episode they loved. And then we update the episode name by the end of it so it has the final name. In our Google Doc, at the top of the document, the other thing the team member will add is the link for recording the episode. So we use Zoom. And so at the top of the document is the Zoom link for this particular episode. And again, going into a little detail, we do one Zoom link per episode, again, just so that everything is named, easy to find, easy to edit, and easy to locate within our Zoom account when we go in there.
Yeah, and this is such a great system because everything is all together in one doc, this one Google Doc. There's the Zoom link, there's our notes, and we always follow the same protocol. We use the same template, and that makes it really easy for us to then create the episode. We know there's always a fairly universal way we intro the show. There's always a review. There's always a fairly standard cadence to how we do things and what part Suzi does and what part I do. And just don't underestimate how much that can speed things up for you. And I think it also helps your listeners to sort of know the cadence of the show. I've got a few podcasts I listen to, and they have a cadence. There's a poetry episode, a show that I listen to, and they have a particular cadence. And I just love the cadence. I just love that I can rely on what's going to happen in that show. And, it's a Google Doc. Again, not rocket science, but so incredibly valuable. Not high tech, but totally, totally works. And, we've kept our roles clear as well, as I was kind of mentioning. So typically, once we've got the Google Doc, remember, Suzi and I have already spent a good deal of time talking about the episode, brainstorming it. Maybe we've had a discussion after a strategy session. So we've both really kind of thought about the topic. Then what will typically happen is I'll do a first draft of the show structure based on those ideas Suzi and I have brainstormed together, and I'll flesh out kind of a first pass of some of the content. And then we go back and forth in the Google Doc. There'll be big pieces Suzi needs to add, all of the kind of unique stories and insights and information that she has that I don't have. And we go back and forth in the Google Doc, which is great because, again, simple tool, Google Docs allow us both to do real-time updating of the document together. So it's a fab collaboration tool. And so I love it when we're both in there together. I can see us both in there working away. And then we're happy with the show. Finally, we go, yep, we're good. And if we're doing an interview, it's slightly different. Typically, whichever one of us has teed up the interview will draft the questions and handle the liaison with the guest. So if you've been listening for a while, you know we get some amazing guests. And these are not people that have just cold called us or that we've just cold called. These are our mates. These are our peers. These are our colleagues. These are people that we've met on projects or in our own masterminds in the US or, that we've hired to do work. These are people we really know well and that we kind of are opening our network really to the podcast. And so typically one of us has a relationship, we'll reach out and then we'll draft the questions and kind of handle that. So that's how that happens if there's a guest. We've also got, if there's a guest, and I just want to mention this because this is kind of cool. You don't have to have all this when you start, but it really, again, in the interest of making your life so much easier, we have a podcast guest form and it is guess what? It's super simple. It's just using a tool that's easy to use, a tool called Wufoo, W-U-F-O-O. I'll include links to all the tools we're going to use in our show notes today. We create a simple Wufoo form that we send to the guest ahead of time to complete. And it asks them to fill in details like their proper name and spelling. You don't want to get that wrong.
Right.
Attach a photo of themselves that they want to use in the show. You don't want to go online and just find some random photo, A, that they may not own the rights to, or B, that they don't like the way they looked in, or that they don't have that hair color anymore, or that it was 10 years ago and they really want an updated one. Whatever it is, ask for the guest's photo. We ask for a bio so we can make sure we're including the information that they want us to know about in our introduction, any links or resources, because again, if you've listened to the show, our guests often give away goodies or links to things or free tools and things like that. So we make sure we get all of that clear in this guest form ahead of time so we can incorporate that into our own Google Doc when we're writing the bio and things like that. So just to be clear, if it's an interview, we write the questions in the Google Doc and we figure out who's going to ask which question. If it's just us, then we've written out the content that we're going to say. And now we've got, just to retrace our steps from the beginning of what we've been talking about today, we've got our show ideas. We've got our recording schedule. We know how we're going to batch things together. Now we know we've got a recording coming up, so we get into our scripting. We've scripted our show. And that script, by the way, is pretty well fleshed out. Of course, we ad lib in lots of places. We're not just sitting here droning on and reading something, word for word, but we've got a pretty scripted show. We like to have done a lot of the thinking ahead of time, and that's that quality you were speaking about before, Suzi. So we can give you the best content possible. We spend hours preparing these episodes. So it's pretty scripted out. Now we're looking at the Google Doc. And another tip I wanted to share, if you're co-hosting like we do, we simply color code that old script. What Suzi's going to say is always in black and what I'm going to say is always in red. And that just makes it super clear for both of us as we're recording. Okay, I can see I've got a big slab here to do. I've got a big section, or we're going to, back and forth a bit here. And what it also does is it avoids us speaking over each other as well. I really find it annoying when I'm listening to, this is just my bugbear. No, I'm not throwing shade. This is just my preference. When I'm listening to a co-hosted show and you can tell they haven't really figured out who's going to do what, and they start talking over each other. And one person is saying something really interesting, and I want to hear what they've got to say, and they get interrupted. The other person cuts across them and says, oh, yeah, right? And they never get back to the point that I wanted to hear about. And so what this does is it really enables each of us to say what we need to say in this really nice container. I feel it's a nice container for collaboration and, bouncing off each other, but also knowing, this is a little bit that I'm going to share, and I can speak to this in the way I want to speak to it, or ad lib if I need to. And you know what else? It's also a great way to scan the document, and we both do this. When we're kind of finished, we sort of scan the doc and go, oh, look, I might say to Suzi, that's a lot of me talking at the start. Why don't you talk about that bit? Or she'll say, hey, that's a lot of you here, or, whatever it is, we figure it out. And we get this nice balance that feels like it's just the right vibe that we want to communicate. And so that's really, Suzi, our pre-recording part of the process. I'm sure you might have a few things to add there about that last little bit, but that gets us to the point where we're ready to roll.
Right. And you can hear, like, we've just spent, 20 minutes or so, and we haven't even started recording yet. But I think that is part of our secret sauce to creating great episodes. Like, we don't shoot from the hip. We give ourselves enough structure, enough time to then be able to ad lib, as Michelle said, and just be really natural and comfortable in our conversation and know our topic, because we do this very thoughtfully. This isn't one more thing we need to do. The podcast has a real home in our ecosystem. And so we give it the time and energy and love that we feel it needs, because we so value your time. So that's our pre-recording part of the process, as Michelle said. So let's talk about stage 2, which is the actual recording. And as Michelle mentioned, we record the show using Zoom. Now, we haven't always. We've done all sorts of different ways. There's lots of tools out there. Riverside FM is one that a lot of our masterminders are using. We've got a proper sound desk at the office. But, in the end, we just found that we could be anywhere in the world and Zoom was easy. Plus, the sound quality is so much better now than it was when Zoom first came out, that we find that this quality still is, because we have a level of excellence that we like, this still works great for us. And the other thing we try not to do, and this comes from planning, is to not have any edits in the show. So when we start the show, we'll have come on and done a real quick recap. Are we ready? Have we got, all the ducks in a row? And then I will count us down, 3, 2, 1, and then I hit record and off we go. Now, if there is something that we want to edit out, what I usually do is just mark the spot in the script in our Google Doc and then tag the team to say, hey, between this point and this point, edit out, or between this point and this point, you're going to find 2 versions. I do it, I cough, and then I do it again, right? So there's a little edit note. And I'll tell you what I do with that edit note later. But we don't usually have any edits. We just go straight through. So if we make a couple of missteps, or there's an and an R, or, there is a cough or whatever, if it's not a real problem, if it's not an error, if it doesn't really upset the flow, we just keep going. Right? It makes it authentic. And back to our earlier point about us needing to be efficient, we just don't have time to get it word perfect. We'd much rather give you a great 1-hour show with a small hiccup or 2 than not deliver anything because it's just not perfect enough. So you don't need to overproduce your show if you are like us, which I know many of you are. Now, if you are a news organization, or maybe you listen to some amazingly produced podcasts. We really like NPR, the National Public Radio show, which is an American podcast. The level of production is beyond, right? But they're big, sponsored podcasts put out by large organizations. In most cases, you're not going to need that level of recording or production. Having said that, though, Michelle, I do want to say, do make sure that your audio quality is great, because this is an audio medium. And for me, there's nothing my bugbear is listening to something that has terrible production. Now and then you might think your microphone's on and it's actually not plugged in right. Okay, that happens. But generally, this is the quality of the sound is so important to the comprehension at the other side. So that's really all I wanted to say about the recording process. Is there anything you'd like to add, Michelle?
Yeah, funnily, I had that note too about the microphone. So, we've been listing off a whole bunch of tools that are either free or really inexpensive. Like Zoom is pretty inexpensive to use, especially if you just want the basic level just to record two people talking or a couple of, 3 or 4 people talking or just yourself. But there is one thing that I do think is worth investing in, and that is a good microphone. And so the most important piece of equipment, in my view, apart from obviously you need a good internet connection and you need some tool to record it, like Zoom that we've mentioned. The other is the microphone. Now, I have a Blue Yeti. I'll put the model in the show notes for you. And yeah, exactly what you said, Suzi. Just make sure you're choosing the right microphone in Zoom or whatever tool you're using to record, so that it's capturing that as the input. And yeah, a couple of times I've recorded a whole episode thinking I'm using my beautiful mic and I'm leaning in and speaking into the mic, and actually it's been my computer mic that's been picking things up, so the sound quality is lower. So just have your little checklist when you first start to record, which we do have a little checklist. Are we making sure that our mic's coming through the right place? Have we got a review? Have we hit the record button? All those things that Suzi said earlier about getting our ducks in a row. And so, that's one big thing that I would add or corroborate or verify or +1 to what you've said. And then I also wanted to pick up on something you said about, when you're prepared, just as the recording process is going on, I wanted to speak to the way you show up, the way that as a podcaster you can show up. You want to be relaxed. This wants to feel like a conversation. You want to have your voice in a tone that people want to listen. And there's all sorts of things you can do to work on your tone of voice. And we've got some other episodes where we've spoken a bit about that. I'll find some links to those. But when you've planned and when it's all mapped out, really then you can just focus on showing up and intently listening to the other person and confidently saying what you need to say, and then confidently ad-libbing when another thought has entered your mind in context. So be relaxed. Give yourself a quiet space. There's nothing worse than background noise. I always like to mute while Suzi is talking, and on Zoom that's super easy to do. So if I need to take a sip of water or move something around on my desk, I'll do it while I'm muted. And I also, this is for Zoom users, I like to minimize the Zoom window so that I've got the Zoom window open and I can also see my Google Doc right there. And I can see both of those things together. I can hit the mute button really easily. I can follow along with what Suzi's saying. And it's a small thing, but it actually really makes it so much more useful to see both of those things on your screen at the same time. So that's really the main things when the recording happens. When you've planned, the recording part's really pretty easy. And like I said, all the tools are pretty simple. All the tools are pretty inexpensive, but I would think about getting a decent mic, and maybe the one you can get to start with is the one you start with, and then you can upgrade later. But Suzi, what mic setup do you have?
I have a bit of a microphone fetish, actually, but I don't say that to say, oh, you should have lots of microphones. I just like a good microphone, and anyway, don't overinvest in your microphone, but do get one that is good quality. So I have a number of microphones. So that at my office, I have a beautiful high-end microphone and headset. I think it might be Sennheiser brand. At home, I've got a Rodecaster, which is actually quite a popular podcasting microphone, and Rode, Rode, is a great brand. But when I'm on the road, I have another of the Blueberry products. Michelle, you said you have the Yeti. I have one that is called Blue, that is a smaller, compact travel mic that still has a great sound. So that is more than enough, and Logitech, like at most sort of gaming or sort of electronic stores, you'll be able to find a pretty inexpensive but good quality microphone. What I don't recommend you use, I love Apple, I love all things Apple. I don't recommend using AirPods for podcasting. I just don't find that the sound is going to be good enough. Even though they're great for listening, I don't find the microphone in the AirPods personally a good enough quality.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. And, again, we're saying all of this in terms of, ideally, if you're somewhere and the only option you have, you've got this great opportunity to be a guest on a podcast, or you found a great person you want to interview at an event that you're at, and all you've got is your AirPods, go ahead and do it. It's better to have it than not have it, providing the sound is, tolerable, that people can make out what's being said. You might even need to say something at the start and say, look, I'm not in my usual studio, but this was so great. I want
Right.
you to hear it. Like all of that is great, but just in the main, in general, if you can. So we're talking about the recording part of the process. And the other thing that I thought I'd just mention, in case anybody's wondering, sometimes Suzi and I will turn video on, because Zoom you can have video and audio, or just audio, or just video. I don't know why you'd ever use that option, but and it can be a great option. Many people do a complete video, full video of their podcast. We've mostly stuck with doing an audio version of the podcast. We'll occasionally turn it on just to get like a little snippet that we might want to use for social, or we're doing an interview. We have done several of our interviews with the video on, because we could see we had other ways to use that content. But mostly we're an audio podcast, and we're happy with that. If we ever decided, you know what, we want to do a YouTube strategy or whatever, then we might switch to video. But just decide what it is you're going to do. And if you're using Zoom, you've got both options. We like audio too, because A, we don't always have to have our hair done.
This is true.
And B, it's just easier to kind of read off and, you know, stay focused on kind of what we're doing than also thinking about being on audio. And one other tip, while we're talking about recording, is listen back to the episodes. You will learn a lot about your voice style and your habits, and even the way you're structuring your content, what works and what doesn't work. Little tics you might have that you don't realize you have until you listen back. Like, I'm going to listen to this episode to see if I've done it, because this will be funny, but I hope I've cured myself of it in the main. I noticed when I was first podcasting, before I would speak, I would go like that almost every time. So Suzi would say, what do you think, Michelle? And I'd go, well, I think.
I'll have to go back and have a listen.
Oh, it was so freaking annoying. I was like, that is annoying to me. That's got to be annoying other people. So I've really worked on that. And things like, you know, going up at the end of a sentence, you know, like trying to land your points. And all of these things you'll just get better and better at as you hone your craft. But do listen back to your episodes. I know when I used to pick my kids up from school, my second child has just left school. I don't do the school run anymore, but I would go and pick them up, and I'd listen to our show, Suzi, on the way to school pickup. And I was listening to it for a whole bunch of reasons. One was to get better at what I was doing. And they'd get in the car and they go, oh, Mum, what are you listening to yourself for? But I said, listen, I really am learning such a lot about what I'm doing by listening back. So that's just a little tip. If you are podcasting and you're not listening to your shows, definitely do that. It's a service to your listeners. It's a service to yourself. And I learned a lot about even our dynamics, Suzi, and what works. And, you know, it was really helpful. I still do it to this day. Do you listen back to our shows?
Now and then, not very often, but when I do, because, you know, we prepare, we record, and I'll go back and go, gosh, that was really good.
If we don't say so ourselves.
If we do so. And because we're so often, you know, getting questions and referring people back to the podcast, like the podcast for us is such a fabulous tool. Like forever, we're still referring people back to episode 2. And so going back and listening is a good refresh, like, okay, that's right. And so sometimes, Michelle, what I'll listen back to is an older episode, because I'm thinking of somebody in our mastermind perhaps and thinking, well, let me see if that's a good episode for them. So I do listen now and then. And yeah, I do pick up my own little quirks as well. I'm sure that you've noticed some things that I do that I could probably improve. So let me know offline.
I will. But you know, everybody knows. We can tell already, like, how beautiful is Suzi's voice. And
not so much today. I sound terrible today, but generally, thank you.
Even you on your worst day, I think, is pretty darn good. So look, we've covered pre-recording, we've covered recording. Now for that final third stage, what happens post-recording? Let's say we wrap up today's session, Suzi hits the end button on the recording. What the heck happens after that? So this includes tasks like editing the sound, writing the show notes. And, you know, even though Suzi said we don't edit our, we try not to edit, we just go from start to finish, there's still the little stinger at the top, the music stinger at the top, the music stinger at the end. There's a tiny little bit of editing that happens. There's writing the show notes. So these are the notes that will actually appear alongside the episode in all the various platforms and on the Her Business website where this podcast also lives. There's the actual act of publishing the episode to the various podcast platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the many, many others that are out there. So we're just going to give you a high-level walkthrough of this process. And this is also where Suzi and I divide and conquer. Another great benefit of co-hosting a podcast is that we, two of us are helping each other on this. Two of us are there doing different parts of the process. So I'll share my next steps after the recording, and then Suzi will share hers. So my next steps after the recording are to put the show notes together. So that is, like I said, what is the information that is going to accompany your show when it appears on Apple Podcasts, when it appears on Spotify, when it appears on your own website, if that is where you also host your podcast. And what you want to do in your show notes is you want to obviously include the title. You want to have something really catchy, a statement or two that really gives people a sense of what the show's about and why they would want to listen. This is where you're going to employ marketing copy. This is where you're going to be thinking about what is the hook for this show. This is where you're going to be thinking about what's in it for the listener. And you want to be concise because people are not going to read a lot of stuff at this point. If they're weighing up, they're driving along as a passenger, not in the driver's seat, but they're a passenger in a car, they're flicking through Apple Podcasts and they're thinking, what show will they listen to? They're going to give your show just a tiny bit of time. So you've really got to grab their attention from the start. So we like to, and maybe you want to check out our show notes, we like to lead with the hook. What is the show about? Then we have one or two other clarifying statements, and then we just get into a bunch of bullets. Listen to this episode to learn more about or to hear more about, and then we list bullets. We like to list somewhere between 8 to 10 bullets, and these are what we call blind bullets. We don't give it away. If we say there's 3 parts to this show, we won't say the 3 parts are pre-recording, recording, and post-recording. The blind bullet will say, listen to this episode to hear about the 3 key stages of your podcast production and why you need to know about each one, or the differences with each one, or the different skills you need for each step. So now it's like, oh, what are the 3 stages? People will click through to find out. So we write blind bullets. And the great thing is if you write these bullets well, let's say you've written 8 to 10, each of those bullets can be repurposed into a social media post.
Absolutely.
So you've got these show notes. You've written these 8 to 10 bullets. Now the team can take them and turn them into 8 to 10 social media posts. Now we're not going to get into the marketing so much on this episode, but that's just a little join the dots there for you. The other thing I do is I choose the imagery for the episode. So I'll go to a free platform, like a platform that has royalty-free images like Unsplash. Or as we shared with you on our AI episode that Suzi mentioned, I'll create the image in Midjourney, or sometimes Suzi, I've been doing a bit with Canva at the moment. They've up-leveled a lot what they're doing with their AI. And we might have a custom image that we've created, or we might have a photo of the speaker or whatever it is.
Or the guest, yeah.
Yeah, the guest. And then we have a set template look and feel. So there's, no matter what the image is, the way the title is displayed, the way the Content Sells logo appears, all of those things are in a set position on the imagery for the episode. So I'll write the show notes, choose an image, send it to the team, and guess what? Of course, we have a template for show notes, don't we? Of course we do. And so the team knows, I know, like, that is how I know how to name that file, where to file that file, who to tag when the file is ready, and then that person that's tagged knows just what to do with that. And because we've kept it all the same every time, it's really easy for everybody. The other thing I'll do, if there's a download to go with the episode, I'll create or update the brief for that. And so our next episode is going to be our recommended book list, or our recommended books for the new year. And so we have this fantastic download, which is our Content Sells recommended reading list. So what we'll be doing after that episode is updating that download with the new books that we've added, and we keep building on that year on year. It's a really valuable resource. So again, those downloads have a template. They have a certain way they look. There's a certain introduction. There's a certain number of sections in the download. There's always a call to action at the bottom, which is about subscribing to the podcast. There is a certain way that is visually laid out. And so I create the brief, which has a certain template. So again, the team knows exactly where that brief is, exactly what to do with it. So they're the kind of next things that I might do after the recording. And Suzi, what are the things you do after the recording?
So there are a number of things. But one of the first things that we do, and I'll do it right after this show, is I fill in a production form. Now, this is a template inside of a tool we use called Wufoo, WUFOO. And on the production form, there are a number of fields that I will fill out for the team. What is the final title? Because we mentioned earlier, we may have a work in progress title, but before we get off our call today, Michelle and I will finalize what that title is. And that title is very specifically written as a compelling headline. So I'll give them the title. I'll give them a link to where the files have been saved. I'll let them know the show notes status. If I have a link to the show notes, I'll provide that. Otherwise, I'll let them know that Michelle will be providing that. And if I know when, I'll mention that. If there's a guest on the show, I'll let them know the guest details and where they'll find those. If there are edits, I will reiterate the edits. If I have the start and stop time, I'll do that. Otherwise, I'll point them to where in the document they'll find them. I'll reiterate the release date and any other information that the team needs in order to produce the show. And so I do that pretty much after we record so that I don't forget any of the details. Then someone on our team will take the file. They will check the audio. They will make any edits. They will then also look at the sound levels, and they have a great skill at being able to just make our sound better, because sometimes the levels will come in and they're a little different. Now, you don't need to do all that, but we have someone who will actually produce the audio. So he adds the sting at the beginning, he adds it at the end, he produces the show notes, adds them to the blog. And then what he does is he puts the audio file inside of a tool called Libsyn, Libsyn. Now, this is the tool that we use that allows us to publish the show on all the different podcast apps. I don't know where you're listening. I tend to listen mostly on Apple Podcasts, but whatever app you're listening to, this Libsyn tool allows you to distribute to all those different platforms. Plus, it's a way for us to track the statistics of every episode. That's one of the things we do. So I fill out the production form. The episode is produced, including the show notes. Now, for the show notes, they appear on our website at a dedicated URL. Now, to make it easy, you'll hear us at the end of the show tell you where to find the show notes. Now, this is a pretty URL that is very succinct, but is different to the final URL on our website. So someone needs to create a redirect from that short URL that we're going to give you to the actual longer URL that appears on our website. So someone does that. Someone also creates the images. So Michelle will have chosen an image or created one with AI, and someone will compile that in different sizes for different uses. Then it all gets scheduled to release at a particular date and time. And we typically release on a Tuesday at 11 a.m. Sydney time across all platforms. The other thing that we have is the Her Business Hub, and this is an online library of all the different resources that we provide our members. And this is exclusively for members, and it has over 300 webinars. It has lots of resources and downloads, and it has all the podcasts. And so when we publish, we not only publish out to the outer world, we publish to our community. And so someone can go into the Her Business Hub at any time and search for a title or a topic from an episode and find it and be able to listen to it right there and then, rather than having to find it inside of Apple Podcasts or on another platform or even on our website. So we make the most of the platforms that we're already using, we're already driving our members to. And like I said earlier, we're often asked like, well, I'm making an offer and I don't know how to do that, or I need tips for writing my sales page, or my lead magnet isn't working. And we can say, go into the hub and use this search term, and it's going to pull up every episode of the podcast that we've done on lead magnets or ideal clients or whatever that is. So once we hit publish, while it's kind of the finishing line in terms of the production process, it's really just the starting line when it comes to getting listeners and getting reach for your podcast. And this is where your podcast marketing kicks in. So the last thing you want to do is say, well, it's on Apple Podcast. We built it, they'll come. It's not the Field of Dreams, for those of you who remember that movie. You definitely have to have strategies for getting people to listen to your podcast, for people to consume your podcast over the millions of other podcasts that are out there. And like Michelle said very early on in today's episode, the marketing of a podcast, how we promote the podcast, is a topic for another day. So we're about to do some long range planning, as we mentioned. So you never know, that might be an episode that you see coming out real soon. Excuse me. So if you have some podcast production tips, we would love to know, right? You might already be doing some great things that would help our listeners that we haven't mentioned today. Let us know. You can either go across to our Facebook page. You've just searched for, excuse me, I'm going to cough.
That's not something we'll edit out, folks. That's just
we'll just leave it right there. So you can find us at Content Sales Podcast on Facebook. And if you let us know there, we'll give you a shout out here on the show. So we produce show notes, as we mentioned, for every episode. And on that show notes page are all the resources and all the links to different episodes or downloads that we want to give you. So I'm going to give that to you in just a minute. But what I want to do just before that is something that I know helps more women. Sorry, we may have to edit this one out.
Well, we might be verging onto editing territory, but listen, if I can tap dance for just 1 minute, maybe we can save it.
Oh goodness. No, we're going to leave it just so that you get the experience. This is the raw version. So over on Apple Podcasts, we have over 500 5-star reviews, and they're reviews that listeners just like you have left for the show. And it makes such a difference to us. We are so happy every time we see a review, and we just want an honest review. But one of the benefits of making a review is that you get a shout out here on the show. And so today we want to shout out the lovely Anita McLaughlin of Sequins and Sand. She is kind of the cozy whisperer. She helps women with body shapes of all sorts to feel comfortable getting into their swimwear every year. Now, she listened to episode 206, which was the 16 essential elements of a high converting sales page. And she said, what an episode 206 is. The value is incredible. There should be a 10-star rating. I am so appreciative. Thank you. I love all your episodes, Suzi and Michelle. I always get so much out of them. This one came just at the right time as I'm working on a sales page right now. I took copious amounts of notes and will be re-listening and to make sure I don't miss a thing. And I got the checklist too. That particular episode had a really valuable download that went with it. And we'll put a link to this episode in the show notes. She said, thank you so much, Anita. So thank you so much, Anita, for leaving the review. I mentioned earlier that we have show notes for today. We're going to link a whole bunch of great resources, and you're going to find it. And this is the short URL that I mentioned at herbusiness.com/produce podcast, all one word, herbusiness.com/produce podcast. That's what we've got for today. Michelle, you kind of hinted at our next episode, but would you give us a lowdown on what's coming up in the next show?
Yeah, I think for both of us, one of our most favorite shows of the year. Well, I'm speaking for myself, but I love it. It is our best books for content marketers. We're going to be doing our 2024 edition, kicking off the new year with what we've been reading and what we recommend to you. This is going to be a mix of new books that you may or may not have heard of, and some old classics that we suggest if you haven't read them, you may want to, or you may want to revisit them. These are definitely books that we're dipping into over and over again. And, maybe you've got that book that is just so valuable to you and you just keep going back to it for wisdom. So we're going to be sharing a couple of those as well. So that's all in our next episode, and it will be coming with that fantastic download, the Content Sales Recommended Reading List. Absolutely grab that when it comes out. Download it, get it, make a list of wish lists for your book, next book order, work your way through it. When we can educate ourselves, we can absolutely change our situation no matter what is going on right now. And in business, I've found books have been just some of the biggest game changers in my life. I love courses. I love going to events. I love masterminding. But gee, Suzi, a book is pretty special.
Yeah, we're both big book fans, as are, a lot of our Her Business community. So as we round out the year, we both want to thank you so much for being a Content Sales listener, whether this is your very first episode or if you've listened right from the very beginning. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We love making this show for you. We have a whole lot more goodness planned for the new year. It's actually going to be a really interesting year with lots more advances with AI. content strategy is shifting, and we're here for it, and we're here to support you as you navigate content marketing in your business. We want to wish you a wonderful holiday season. We're hoping you're getting a little bit of a break, and here's to an incredible new year. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time right here on the Content Sales Podcast. Bye for now.